or idea that may come out of this process, how does that translate into a team of 2 or 3 other teachers who may not necessarily be on board with it? So that's just a little bit about us, and I will turn it over to Rachel.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, last but not least, great. So in the beginning, my name is Rachel Klein. I am the Director of Service Learning at Riverdale Country School, which is a pre-K through 12th grade co-ed independent school located in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, just north of Manhattan. About 1,100 students overall, and that is across 2 campuses and about 26 or 27 acres of land. So it is quite a large campus. When you think about Manhattan or city schools, you think of maybe one building and very vertical. We are very spread out. We're very fortunate to have that land and certainly make use of it. The mission of Riverdale Country School has recently focused on building mind, character, and community. We recently went through a review process, and we used to have a 4th aspect, which was commitment, and I guess we're either no longer committed or we are committed to all 3, which is what I like to think is the case. So we've got these 3 prongs now: mind, character, and community, and we like to think of ourselves as a leader in character education, which is a major component of what we do. We have a long-standing relationship with the KIPP schools, which are nationwide, doing a lot of research for years now on character education. So that has been very exciting. And my focus comes in with the community. So we have service learning in all 3 divisions: lower, middle, and upper school. We have a service learning club for 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders that meets after school every Monday. It's a very popular club for them. When students get to 5th grade, the head of the lower school, a couple of years ago, we removed the student council, student government piece, and in its place is this philanthropic roundtable where the 5th graders, as the leaders of the lower school, what's neat was that the leadership of lower school now is all focused around service, and so that has been a really neat change for us. And then in the middle and upper school, we made the transition over from about 4 or 5 years ago when I got there, from community service over to service learning. With that change, no longer require any required hours to graduate a service, and I'm sure that varies at many of your schools as well. But with that change, was a bit of a fear that so students may not do the service if they're not required to. But it was becoming, for the woman who's in the position before me, was becoming just a lot of a checkbox and paperwork and filing, and the service, whether or not it was meaningful to the students, was up in the air. And so when we took that requirement away, we laid down a very clear expectation that every Riverdale student engages in service in one way, shape, or form or another throughout the Riverdale experience and then throughout their lives. So we want them to continue to pull on that service experience, continue to engage in whatever communities they go on to after Riverdale, and develop lifelong learners, like lifelong active citizens that really are not hesitant to jump in and into whatever community they end up in. So a little bit of background around our service learning committee, which is young. It's a lot younger than certainly than Jim's, and we're about a year behind Allison. So it was initiated last year. We've been part of undergoing quite a few exciting changes, and one of some exciting new initiatives at Riverdale have been things such as blended learning, experiential ed, hacking spaces, and then a focus on service learning rather than on community service. And that's where this idea to create a committee where we crossed all divisions, lower, middle, upper school, all disciplines, all different departments, invited students of all ages, I was going to say students and faculty of all ages as well, but students, faculty, administrators across the board to, as a voluntary group to join, committee to join, to come talk about service learning. What is it? What does it look like? Especially as we're making that transition. And so it's been exciting. It's been very exciting to be there during this time. Students are excited, faculty are excited about it. We meet quarterly, so we've had 3 out of the 4 meetings so far this year, with varied themes, activities, presentations, one from an outside guest, and I was going to share a little bit of that with you, as well as some presentations from our students themselves. And these meetings take place over lunch during the school day. We had discussed whether we do it after school or not. We may, and we didn't want to fight with the sports schedule or anything like that. So we make it easy, as easy as possible for those to attend who want to. In the first quarterly meeting, we did a whole lot of brainstorming with Post-its, actually. We love Post-its at our schools, I'm sure many of you do, about, what do you know about service learning? What do you wish you knew about service learning? And all sorts of interactive brainstorming with those in the room. We framed the group for those that were there, and explained to them that their role was really to go back to their contingency, whether it was the 6th grade, the 2nd grade, the athletics department, the English department, and serve as an ambassador, a service learning ambassador for the group that they felt that they were representing when they were in the room. And so during that first meeting, we had a lot of exchanges amongst, and I'll get into this when I talk about some of the successes, but conversations that you wouldn't have thought would have happened otherwise. A lot of across disciplines, etc. One example I can give is we had a dance teacher in a small group with the head of the math department and a 7th grade student that was learning about angles and algebra, and they put together this cross-divisional idea of using dance and dancing with certain acute angles, obtuse angles, etc., to combine dance and math and integrate it into the 7th grade curriculum, which was an exciting idea that was followed through on, which was great. Our second quarterly meeting, we hosted a visitor from Christchurch, New Zealand, who we had just done an exchange with for the first time last summer. And he is a professor at University of Canterbury and teaches courses on service learning, so his visit was a perfect fit and perfect timing for our quarterly meeting, and he spoke a bit about the earthquakes that happened in Christchurch, which we went over to help with some relief and rebuilding effort over there, and really framed it all around rebuilding communities, and then turned it on the students and faculty that were sitting in that room and said, sort of at the end, what's your earthquake? What is it that you are passionate about, that you are going to do, that you want to, where are you going to jump in and create change in your community? It doesn't need to be in New Zealand, doesn't need to be far away, it can start right here. So that was a very inspiring talk. The third session was some student presentations. So we had a middle school student and an upper school student, both interested in mental health and in reducing the stigma around teenage depression and mental health within our community. So both, neither had ever met each other before, but a 7th grader, Michelle, spoke about her personal experience with a close camp friend, not knowing that she had been suffering with depression, and then wanting to do something about it and talk about it out in the open. So she created an emotions board, which is hanging right in our student center now, and with a color-coded key for kids to write up their emotions throughout the day, what made them feel that way. And then an upper school student spoke as a representative of the Human Rights Now group on our campus, all around reducing stigma and the language that's used, and what language can replace, language that is that they deem not appropriate when talking about mental health issues. And so through this meeting, the two of them started brainstorming and are now working together. Across ages, it's been really neat to see. The fourth one is coming up, and we are starting to think about how to frame it as, now that we've talked a lot about this, how are we going to put a lot of this into action? What's the next step? We're thinking about setting forth a challenge for those that are part of the committee to think about for the following year. So, let's see. So I did already talk about some of these, but again, the connections that are made across disciplines and divisions that may not have otherwise been made. That dance teacher who may never have had that conversation with that math teacher, had that student not been there to talk about the recent lesson in in angles in math class, continue conversations, checkpoints. We meet quarterly, which is, it feels like maybe not enough. Perhaps 6 is a better way to go. And I'll get to that when I talk about some of the challenges, is the momentum. So it does continue the conversation, but the question is, how do you continue it outside of those 4 meetings a year? And how do you continue those 4 conversations? And then another one is putting notice on the student or the faculty member who chooses to be there. Right? This is not required. This is not. Nobody's getting paid to be there. No students receiving extra credit in their classes or anything like that. So why are they there? They're there because they want to represent their contingent. They want to be an ambassador of service learning and bring it back to their grade, their home base, their department, their division, etc. So we really stress the responsibility of them being in that room and taking their message back, doing some brainstorming and reporting back to us. And then in terms of accountability, so that's hard. How do we hold anyone accountable after we have all that excitement in the room itself? How does that happen? What is the follow-up like? What is the follow-through like? And how do you make sure that somebody's doing what they said that they would do? The action piece of it, how do we make it more action-oriented? We do a lot of interactive activities while in that room, but how do we take it? We talk a lot about service learning is getting out to the community. The meetings take place within a 4-wall room, so how do can we take that committee and actually go do something that's action-oriented in the Bronx? And then as I said, momentum. How do you keep up the excitement? How do you keep it going after that? We've had a pretty successful first year, and we've built that momentum, and folks are excited to be there and to be making these connections. So just how do you keep it going? I think that is it. And
So these are some of the common themes I think that all of us have found, even within our different models. So a student and faculty committee, a faculty committee from within our school, and a faculty committee across schools. There are some common things that have emerged for us, and we would love to hear from you what this has looked like in your schools in terms of how committees or consortium work has taken shape for you, and how any of these ideas might be resonating with you in terms of the work of your own schools.
does anyone's school currently use a committee or consortium structure currently?
Emergent.
And what has that process been like for?
So this year we started, so I work at Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. And this year at our high school, we started a community service leadership team, which is 3 student representatives from each grade, to not only they've worked with their grade deans to develop specific themes for their grade that kind of tie into so the juniors are focusing on education because as they're starting the college process, that seemed to be a real tie. The sophomores are focusing on health and hunger because that ties into the health and PE curriculum. And then the 9th graders actually just joined the CSLT second semester once they kind of had their feet on the ground. And they're focusing on the environment because that ties into the 9th grade biology course. So it's one, kind of them being representatives within their own grade to try and get feedback from their grade and plans service activities for their grade as a whole, which we really didn't have before. We didn't have grade-specific service opportunities, and so now it's a great opportunity for them to educate their peers and engage them directly in service. And then also it's a way for me to kind of get more regular feedback from our student body about how we can evolve our own service learning and service program at our school, and it's been tremendously helpful. Just one, to kind of, as we started meeting as a group, and we meet every other week during lunch on Mondays, but just to get their sense of how they perceive our service program and our service structure was their interpretation, and I commonly held beliefs in the high school were different than the program that I was hoping that we were developing, and so that's been fascinating. And so now it just seems like almost more, whereas before I kind of felt like the service like czar, like doing it all on my own. Now it feels much more like democratic, which seems much more authentic to our own school community, to have their representation. And it's wonderful to be able to delegate, some planning and execution of projects to our students, to really engage them in that leadership process. It's been wonderful. I mean, we're a couple months in, but I think there's a lot of potential for this group to evolve.
I have a question.
Yes,
Is that okay?
of course.
So Jim, I'm wondering if you have a sense of how often the internet is used among the participants in your consortium, and then what are you thinking about in terms of strategies to find out if teaching practice is actually changing, or if people are leaving inspired and it sort of stops there?
Yeah, pretty often, more by actually lower school teachers than any other. We found that.
Okay.
And we keep, the woman who's running this is an expert in metrics, so we keep applying metrics to all of this to try to figure out what we're doing. And the second part was about future strategies.
Well, it was about, I think you listed as one of your challenges that people are leaving from these collaborative experiences inspired, but how do you know what's changing in terms of?
Yeah, that's again, we constantly poll and say, what are you interested in? And in fact, they got stuck on, I think it was project-based learning for a long time. We had the people in from University of Pennsylvania about grit and perseverance also, and everybody just, we keep saying after each session, where do you want to go next, et cetera. I think we stayed with grit and perseverance, all that Angela Duckworth work for about a year and a half, because people wanted to keep pursuing that. So we also bring in, I should mention, we bring in outside people too. I think some people from various KIPP schools in Philadelphia were the ones that came in and talked about that. So we're not just using professionals within our own little group there. We bring in outsiders as well. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. I mean, you hope you're applying the metrics correctly, and the enthusiasm, who shows up for the meetings, shows you something too. We draw usually 25 to 30 teachers in most meetings. So as long as that keeps happening, we feel pretty good about what they're getting. But is professional development the way we want to go in the future? That it's been great, but maybe there ought to be other ways. Maybe we ought to be pursuing some funding streams and some things we can do together. Some of the schools will collaborate. We have a garden that's down at that school, St. James, I mentioned, that we helped start, and that's gone out to the neighborhood, et cetera. There ought to be have bigger dreams. We're trying to think a little bigger than maybe some of the things we've done today.
Other thoughts, questions, things that you're thinking about for next steps?
Yeah, I think where I'm seeing challenges are having people consistently show up. I think we have a lot of people who are invested in this kind of work, but then it feels like a lot of time and all these things, classic service learning buy-in issues. But we've been able to do like a week in the summer with paying people for that week. So I guess, do you guys have any advice on how to kind of, I could see once it's up and running, it being more successful, but later on, how, do you have advice about how to kind of get that going in terms of commitment from people?
I would say, as I said, we face the same challenges. People feel very badly when they're not there. They're invested enough that it's not just sort of, oh, I'm blowing that off. They're apologetic, they apologize to their group, but it is, I think for any of us, it is a huge challenge. I think the idea of summer and of financial incentives is interesting to think about. Do other people feel like they've found strategies that have worked well in that regard?
We use food as an incentive. We can't pay people, but we offer a very yummy lunch during our meetings. No, but in all seriousness, we give them the dates well in advance so that they can put it on their calendars and send reminders and have them, hopefully mark it and then look forward to it. Food doesn't.
You can get a teacher teaching a service learning course too. That's your best advocate. So I know a lot of times we're based in the high school, at least more in the humanities. We've got the AP environmental science teacher teaching a service learning course, and all of a sudden she's one of the great advocates for this work in the school as well. I think a lot of it too is, just looking back on, we have long tenured heads at our school, but the last couple of heads, if the head of school is up giving a clear message, this is what we care about, and you better be involved, that makes such a difference. And we've, at our school, been fortunate enough to have two heads in a row that have clearly articulated that to the faculty in big meetings and everything else, and implied that this is part of your obligation if you're gonna work at this school. And I know, we can't all run in and tell our head, you better start doing that, but we have heads here.
Right, I agree with that, but it's helpful, I think, in terms of the accountability, in terms of feedback, not in terms of evaluation, that I facilitate one of the critical friends group, and then as I'm moving through the school, I have a small faculty, I can give feedback immediately on what I saw from that. So I think that is a way, but just because of the structure and size of my school, I am able to do that. And then I also teach, so they also can come into my classroom and see my wife. They can, they're free D block. They can come and see. So I just think that's, so in addition to the message, if there's a way to have another administrator committed in a way that is participatory, not in a way that is evaluative, or even the way that is facilitative, it just, I happen to be the one with the training, I think can be helpful.
That's a good thought, and actually our division principals for each of the 3 divisions are a part of this committee, which communicates a message as well.
And it doesn't have to be a head of school. Head of school would be lovely, but even our director of athletics has been at all 3 of our quarterly meetings so far, and that sends a clear message that he's committed to this, he wants to be there, and then his athletes have started to show up, and they've been present and very vocal in the room as well, which has been neat because you don't necessarily always think of service and athletics going hand in hand. So as long as you have a stakeholder there that, whether it's head of school or division head or somebody who's very prominent in the school community who can sort of powerhouse, or get bodies moving, it's always great.
And just, this is kind of a question for everybody because the school that I'm at currently has like a very old school community service program and we're looking at changing it for the future. But my concern is how do you create sort of a cohesive student experience within that? I like the idea of the faculty being involved, being sort of self-selecting and being in the room because they're actually genuinely engaged with the idea and want to bring it into their classroom. But then if you're only having the students who have those teachers getting that experience, what happens for all the rest of those students? And so that's kind of my dilemma that I'm trying to figure out, like how do I handle that right now? Every kid kind of has the same experience. Half of them hate it, but they have it, you know what I mean? And so like how do I get this better experience for everyone? I know it's probably super idealistic, but like that's what I'm trying to figure out.
We've had, 5 years ago or so, took a Quakerism course as a requirement for 10th graders. And just said, we're gonna put a common service learning experience in there. So every child in 10th grade will go out to a Philadelphia public school at some point during their course, a trimester course. So they have a common experience and they can share that. That's a theme for the 10th grade as well. I sort of shamelessly used 2 people in the best. We had a student, great service, his name was Matt Ryan, he plays for the Atlanta Falcons. And I shamelessly use him at all times, saying, look at this guy, played 3 sports at this school, still was in the top 3 in his class all 4 years of high school in service. You can do it. And it's amazing how some of our kids would never even consider that, respond. Now, I admit the faculty piece is a tough one, no question.
Just an idea that our school does. Lower school is very hard to get everyone involved, but they have formed family groups in which 2 teachers and then 2 students from 5th grade, 2 students from 4th grade, 3rd grade, all the way down to kindergarten, meet as a family group, and then together they participate in some sort of service project.
That's great.
And so all teachers in the lower school participate, and all children participate, and it builds leadership with the 5th graders, leading the little kindergartners and on down. And the family groups stay together all the way throughout their lower school experience. When the 5th graders graduate out, then they bring in 2 new kindergartners. But the families stay together. So often you'll see somebody in the middle school wave to their a little person because we're K to 12. They'll wave to a little person in the lower school, and so that connection remains all the way up through high school.
What a great way to make it.
Internal community. Yeah.
Yeah, we also have had, I think one approach that we've taken is finding grades where the entire team of teachers in that grade is invested in it, and so kids may not be getting the same experience across every single grade at every point, but like our 5th grade, which is our first year of middle school, our 5th grade team, not 100%, but a critical mass of them are very on board with public purpose and have spearheaded several great projects in the 5th grade, and it's created now when those kids come to 6th grade, they want to know, like, so what are we, like, they ask their teachers, so what, like, what are we doing this year? And so that's been helpful. I think those kids come into 6th, 7th, 8th grade and beyond having had an experience across that particular grade that hopefully inspires other teachers as well.
Well, just to piggyback what you were saying, why don't you think there's buy-in? I mean, there's a critical mass, you said, but those two teachers aren't.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, that's a pretty broad question, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's for us, it's some sort of classic things. Like, I'm a history teacher, I'm not a public purpose teacher. I've heard that from a couple of people, or I'm a music teacher, like, this doesn't relate to what I do. And so that's where we continue to have more work to do on showing what some of those connections can look like. But I think the energy within that particular grade level team for us has been contagious because there are several different things happening. It's worked well.
I was gonna say, I think like, I work with a lot of schools in the partnership programs, and I think one of the biggest hurdles is schools not actually knowing what they're doing. So when you ask a school, what are your service learning projects? There are lots of one-offs from teachers, and so it's being able as a school to articulate everything and sharing that knowledge with all the other faculty, that this is what's going on in a large scale, and so that there's definitely peer pressure going on, so that helps, and it helps create a school-wide narrative of, okay, so we have all these programs, like what is the underlying theme going on, and you can sort of create a storyline from there. But I think the biggest hurdle is that schools don't know, when you ask them what are you doing, a lot of schools don't know everything they're doing because it's all over the place. So it helps to write it down.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe one
The
last
last thing I was going to
comment.
say, something that's helped us was utilizing something that already existed. Because I think people have pushed back to like the idea of like another thing you're putting on like this. So we have an advisory time in middle school. It wasn't always being used effectively. So we made it clear that we expected this to be a part of your advisory, but you had a choice within a relatively narrow scheme of like what you were interested in and what your advisory group was interested in. So rather than having to be like a chaperone to an arbitrary experience that maybe you weren't committed to, these are children you know well, and you have to spend time with them anyway. So why don't you guys, as a group, kind of like the family group, find something that as a group you're going to be committed to, and then it felt less like, it actually felt like alleviating a way of how we're going to spend this time, as opposed to like, we're making you do this extra thing. So that's kind of it.
And then it's sharing those success stories little by little, which would help, spread the word. And then once those stories get spread, hopefully it encourages others to partake as well.
We'd be happy to continue conversations with any of you, but thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
Introduce myself, Carl suggested I introduce myself. My name's Blake Cohen. The National and I'm in DC. And he was here. Nothing I'd like more. Hold on there.
Yeah.
Anyway.